Welcome, Susan. I'm really excited for our chat today. Some interesting topics I think that so many people will really enjoy, and perhaps are topics that they haven't really gone into as much, and this will inspire them to chat about it. So welcome.
Well, I hope so. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Lara. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we know you're a yoga teacher, but I'd really like to start in the beginning, and I always like to hear about the pathway into finding yoga, what you were doing, what your life was like at that time, and how this practice and this lifestyle has really transformed into where you are today.
Oh my gosh. I love that the name of your podcast is Redefining Yoga because it has been redefined in my life so many times. Like what the idea of yoga is to me, it just changes and is morphed and it's a totally different thing now than when I started. Um, for me. But I was married and I was working in advertising and I was living a pretty hard lifestyle, that lifestyle that's like work hard, play hard. And um, I had all of the things that I thought I should have, that I was, that story of like, I have all the things and I'm miserable. And how did this happen? And what does that mean? And then if this doesn't make me happy, then what will? And where do I find it? All of those things. But all the checks, check marks, check husband, check house, check job, check money. And yeah, I was self-destructing and I felt very empty. Now, I started doing yoga when I was 21. So my ex-husband actually took me to my first yoga class. And he's not what you would traditionally call a yogi, but he's a rugby player and the rugby players were doing yoga and he was like, you should come try this thing with me. So I went. And for me, it was my life opened up and was never the same. But I started doing yoga when I was 21 and all throughout my 20s, I continued my practice. And it was like, your basic vinyasa yoga in a studio I was going to at the time. And all throughout my 20s, I was also drinking myself to death and, just falling apart in a lot of ways, but holding it together externally because that's what I thought you do. That's what I thought, like how it looks on the outside was so important. So the further I got away from what it felt like on the inside, the more miserable I became. Although I didn't know it at the time, I wouldn't have been able to use those words for what I was experiencing at the time. I just knew I was really unhappy and I didn't know how to get myself out of this box that I felt trapped in. It was really my life that I felt trapped in, but it was a life I had created for myself. But at the time, your 20s, I did thinking that everybody else was responsible for my unhappiness. It was my husband's fault. It was the job. It was the place. It was the people. I was just projecting it all. And then some point I had to get really honest with myself and I just thought I need to know who I am outside of these things. Outside of being somebody's wife or boss or employee or sister or daughter, all of these roles, I needed to know myself outside of that. So I think yoga was always, even though it wasn't at the center of my life back then, I was practicing. And I think it was just slowly working its way through me. And I didn't really know that that's what was happening, but it was doing its work. And then at one point I just said, I've got to go. I've got to go. And I quit my job and I left the States. And my husband at the time understood. And he's amazing. He's an amazing human. And he understood and said, okay, go. And so I left. I moved to Spain. Um, and it was just a wow. My life, it was like I could breathe for the first time in my life. I felt like it was a big death in that regard. It was like an ego death, a death of all of these identifications. And it was scary as hell. But also, I remember this feeling of like literally feeling guided, like there was something moving me. I was being moved. And so I felt a lot of trust at the same time, a lot of just like, I'm letting go and I'm just going to trust and let myself be moved. And in that first year that I was living in Spain, I got a lot deeper into my practice. It was all about practice. It was like practice had become the priority for me. And I just gave myself the space and the time, gave myself the permission to drop in and feel all the things that I had been numbing with alcohol and really just face myself. And that felt like death. That felt, there's a reason why we run.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah. Well, let me first say that that's incredibly brave because, just like you mentioned that you love the name of the podcast, which I do as well. And I think the whole premise is that we are redefining ourselves. Hopefully, that's the goal throughout our lives. And what I've been practicing for 27 years, and I was noticing this tendency for people to put yoga in a box. This is yoga. This is not yoga.
Yeah.
What you're practicing is yoga. What you're not, And
Yes.
I thought, who is to tell anyone what is or isn't yoga?
Yeah.
It should be constantly redefined. And I've had many, many Indian friends who are always perplexed because they're usually not the ones that are up on the, mountain saying, this is not yoga, you're not practicing it correctly. They're welcoming the evolution just like any transformative practice has. And the people that want to put it in a box, it's a safe place. Like I can identify what I'm doing is the right thing. Similarly, what you did is you took this box that we define as being success. We have been told that subliminally and outright for many, many years, probably since the time we were young. And certainly some of us of a certain generation, not my generation, but even before, as women, we were told success is finding a good husband,
Yes.
having a nice house, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, these are boxes that really limit us and really ask us to shut down inquiry. So I guess my question for you is to have the courage to have that physical change, location change, emotional change, to follow that path of inquiry. Was there one singular thing, or was it just a combination of listening to that inner self that had been tuned in to a higher frequency through your practice?
It was a matter of saving my own life. That's what it felt like. Like I need to save my own life. And I think when the pain of your life begins to outweigh the fear of change, things shift. Because I had been terrified of living without my husband. The thought of that, if you had told 24-year-old or 25-year-old, you're not going to be with this person, that was my worst fear. And then I remember having conversations with him about like, I wanted to quit. I knew that drinking was a thing for me, an issue. And I remember saying to him, but what would we do? Who would our friends be? Like, what would I do for fun? And my whole life would change. And just that fear of, it's all going to look different. And I just was terrified and I was not ready. I was not ready until I was. And I think that that turning point is when I just knew that if I didn't change something, I was going to die. And, and, um, that's how much I was drinking. That's how much I was self-destructing. And the pain of it just became too much. And I said, you know, no matter what happens, I'm just willing. I'm willing to let go and I'm willing to just jump because I cannot live. This is not the life I want. I'm not going to live like this. I'm not going to let that fear just run me into the ground. I'm going to just save my own life. And it's an empowering thing because, you know, like I was feeling like it's somebody else's fault, feeling like it's somebody else's fault, or blaming the external, like my husband, or it felt very, it's very disempowering. And so it was, but it was more comfortable for me to do that at the time, to believe that, than to actually turn and look at myself. And I think the more energy I gave to that, the more I was able to trust myself. So there's that, like, I can't, that piece of self trust, it can't be built without taking risks. It just can't. So if I stayed and stuck, you know, blaming other people and stuck in my own life and it felt very disempowering. It's just like this cycle. And then the more I drink and the more shame I feel and the more I drink. And once I started looking at myself and realizing I can handle this. I can handle this. I started to feel less ashamed of who I was. And I started to be able to trust myself a little bit, just a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then that's a cycle, an upward kind of spiral that's like, okay, I trust myself a little bit more, then I can see myself a little bit more, and I know I can handle a little bit more. And it just kept going until I just knew I could jump. I knew I could do what I had to do for myself. And then I did. And then more trust, more self-trust. And because I knew I could handle the consequences of my actions, no matter what came. And then that's yoga. So yeah.
It sounds like what you did is like that Native American saying about that there's two wolves that are in you, and one is destructive and one is powerful and good. And, you know, well, how do you, you know, which is the one that's going to come forth? And it's the one that you fuel, the one you feed. So you have to feed the brave one and not feed the one that's living in fear and living and making you destructive toward yourself and toward your life. So from Spain, where did you venture to next?
So after Spain, you know, all these things were happening to me in Spain when I was really getting into my practice, and I didn't have like a yoga community or anything like that. And so I didn't have a vocabulary to understand these experiences and which I'm grateful for, because then the identification comes in. Right, making a story about it. It was just things that were happening. And at that point I decided I'm going to go to a teacher training and because this is what it's like, this is what I love doing. I might as well move in this direction, fuel that wolf, feed that wolf. And so then I just started researching different schools, and I found this school in Thailand online. I found it online. And I just from a gut level said, okay, that's the one. That's where I'm going next. And I finished my year in Spain. I was teaching English. And I finished that year of teaching and went to Thailand and did a 500 hour. That was all they offered. They didn't at that time. This was in 2009. There wasn't. It was 500 hour. There wasn't a lot of 200 hours. It was just a whole 500 hours. So it was a 3.5 month program, and my life just
I bet.
continued to blow wide open. It was a totally different yoga than I had ever experienced. Everything felt so exotic. You know, living in Asia felt so exotic. It was so different than any place I had ever been. And the yoga was exotic and esoteric, and everything just blew my mind open.
And what part of that experience do you feel like you've brought with you into your kind of more current state of teaching and now leading retreats and leading these programs that we're going to talk about?
Oh gosh, the sex and the
Oh, the sex was there. Oh, well, tell us more. I didn't know that about living in Thailand for 3.5 months.
Yeah, well, I ended up staying. I ended up staying for years. So most of my 30s, I would spend half the year in Thailand and half the year in India. So I lived in those places for many years. And that community in Thailand, unbeknownst to me at the time, was a tantric community. Now, right, tantra is a whole thing to unpack, but it's a lot of people hear that word and they think sex, and especially now that I'm mentioning it within this context of sex. And the reason is because I was taught that. We were taught that. And there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of conflating classical tantra with neo tantra in this community. And I didn't know. I thought it was all classical tantra. I thought it was all tantra. And so coming out of that whole experience has been a whole other thing. But now I know. Now I'm clear, and I like to be really clear when I teach. You know, that the sex piece is not really a part of the practices of classical tantra. There's a very small part in the classical texts that have to deal with sexuality, but it is predominantly in terms of practices, not about sex. And so there's sacred sexuality, and there's neo tantra, and that does involve sexuality. And
I think that's when we think of like Sting talking about tantric yoga and how he could have, these 2.5 hour intercourse sessions, and everybody's like, I like that.
Yes.
But yes, so for the classical tantra, I think I understand it, but for people that are listening, when you talk about sex in this more classical way, sexuality, creativity, that area of the body that is really our identity more than the act of sex. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, Tantra is an all-inclusive path. Classical Tantra is that, I'm not shelling things here, but like everything is holy. There is nothing that could not be God. Everything is sacred. And so in that way, sexuality is another part of this world, a form. And so therefore is included, just like anything else, as a path for realization. So I think that what happens is people, because right now and where we are living, our consciousness is really we're obsessed with sex, and so It's like, oh, this is a convenient tradition to focus on sex then and make it a whole path in and of itself. But classical tantra doesn't put that emphasis there. It's more about finding the holiness in form and the formless. Where up until this point, a lot of traditions regarded the formless as a little, meaning regarded consciousness as a little bit as the thing to realize, capital S self or God, and that the body or the world of form with all of its temptations and all of its pleasure was actually an obstacle on the path towards to God or to self-realization. But Tantra was like, but this too, the body is also a vehicle. The body, the whole world of form, pleasure, all of it, the profane, anything that is in the world of form is also sacred and holy. And so that's really the main difference there, the turn that Tantra took. And let's use this world of form. Let's use visualizations, mantra, colors, and body to realize the truth of the truest nature, of who you are. So that's the difference. And then studying classical texts, and we did that in this community. And we were also practicing sacred, we were having, doing sex rituals and sex magic stuff, and a lot of sexual exploration. The point at this time was about using that sexual energy to go beyond form into the formless, in the two of form to formless, to merging. And so that was the practice.
And how did that practice take you to a different stage in your life, in terms of all that you had left behind, really, to travel into this new space of inquiry and, that bravery and the unknown? But I'm imagining, I know you're from Texas, like these, even today in our modern day world, we mostly in the Western world, we don't talk about sex in any way except that the way that we, sell it.
Yes.
So what happened to your kind of personal life during this time?
Wow. Okay. So, I was saying in my, before I had been numbing and and running from feeling things and blaming my husband for a lot of things. And one of them being my own sexual, blockages, I guess. Is that word is a tricky one for me, but
I know it's like frigidity, but that sounds like, that doesn't sound nice either, right?
Right. For my own, sexual issues. And I was blaming him. It's like, our sex is not good because of you. And so at this point in my life, I came back home to my body, and that was the yoga. The yoga helped me come back embodied in my body and start to feel. And then I started to get more honest with myself about trauma that lived in my body and sexual trauma that was living in my body, and being able to heal that through sexual exploration and going deep into feeling a lot of the things that I had pushed aside, which is the nature of trauma, right? It's like in those moments when it seems like it's too much, our nervous system gently and kindly just puts those parts aside for another time. And so this was the time. This was the time for me to learn to be with all of that strong emotion and all of the things that I hadn't been wanting to feel, and to feel them and let that energy that had been frozen begin to defrost and to move and to flow. And so all of this energy just came back to me. And it just opened up my life, that healing. And, now since then, I've been working with women. That was in 2009. And ever since then, I've been working with other women. And I can't find one that has not experienced some kind of sexual trauma. And, big T, little t, it doesn't matter. It's just what is held in the body. And the body doesn't really understand the difference between, oh, that's big trauma, or that's little trauma, or that wasn't a big deal. It's the body responds to whatever feels like it's overwhelming in the moment. And so it's all right there. The yoga, the sex, and the death. It's like being in the body, meeting sexual energy and healing sexual energy, and then the intensity of what that can feel like. It feels like a death. And ultimately, like working through those things, being able to experience pleasure in sex, that had been a foreign thing to me. And being able to understand the pleasure of the body, and being able to understand sex and using sexual energy as a devotional practice or as prayer, so that there can be the dissolution of two becoming one, and that kind of exalted experience in sex. All of that was just so healing. And I realized, oh, this is just another pathway. This is another way of to feel that no mind place, or that dissolution. But really, it's sexual energy meeting the heart. That's what's happening, which is, from a yogic perspective, it's second chakra up to Anahata chakra, which is the heart. It's the union of the masculine and feminine within, and then the dissolving into bliss. And that's it all. That's it right there. So
and that's what you teach now. I mean, you have these, let's talk about your programs, the ESD programs that you run. What do those look like for someone who might be interested, whether it's a retreat form or online? I don't know if you have that, but can you tell us a little bit about how you have used all of your own background and your own experiences and kind of package this for healing and transformation for others?
Yeah, well, it is a mirror of my own journey. So it is definitely something that is built from an inner knowledge of all of the material, like an experiential thing. It isn't something that's just coming from the mind or something I read in a book. It's definitely mirroring my own journey. And of this, it's the yoga, sex, and death. And it's offered. I taught it for many years. The first time I taught it was in 2014 in a 6-week format. So it's offered in a 6-week format. And it's also offered in in-person retreat, which is a little bit more intensive. So there's a yoga, sex, and death 1. There's a yoga, sex, and death level 2. And there's a yoga, sex, and death level 3. And level 3 is the facilitator training. I train facilitators to teach this course. It's pretty in depth. And I teach max 4 women a year I take for level 3. And YSD level 1 has different entry points. So like I was saying, you can do it as the 6-week course. You can do it as the immersive intensive retreat, or you can do it online. So there's different ways to take it. And the online version is called YSD Basics. So it's just a lot of the foundational concepts of yoga, sex, and death, as well as yoga practices. So if you feel like that is intimidating, that whole, just the name is intimidating, then I would say you're probably the person that it's a good fit for.
Exactly. If you want to run from it, that probably means you need to run toward it.
That's what a lot of women, that have come say. They're like, I came because it scared just the title scared the crap out of me, so I knew I had to do it. And so there's different levels. You can dip your toe in with the online course, or you can take it in a little bit more digestible in the 6-week, or you can dive in for the retreat. You can do all three. I have women that have done all three. I have women that have done the retreat 4 times. And those are the ones that often end up becoming facilitators. Like they want the path and they go through the whole thing. But yeah, it is there is a 6-week course. I am teaching a retreat. Oh, that is there was something I wanted to say and I'm remembering it now. It's been for women only since 2014. It's been strictly a course for women. However, for the first time in October, I'm doing a co-ed, including men, and I have a co-facilitator, a co-lead named Keith McGinnis, who is fantastic and has been also doing this same work. He was also living with me in that community, and is a teacher. He's a yoga teacher and a facilitator of authentic relating. He's fantastic. So we are co-leading this group in bringing men into the fold for the first time. So I am very interested to see how this goes. Especially, it's just been so close to my heart, this work with women. Mm-hmm. And also it's important work for men as well. So we're going to open it up and see how that goes. And I'm excited about it. I will still do retreats that are for women only. And also I will do retreats that include men, probably with Keith.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the death part? Because I think the sex part you covered to or at least we got a little bit of a glimpse. Death we talked about, you were mentioning like when you moved to Spain, there was a death that you have to mourn, that old chapter that even though you were so ready to leave it, like you said, it was destroying you. But a death is another idea, term, thought, reality that humans are so uncomfortable with in general. I'm sure in different parts of the world, they're much more there's a lot more reverence and discussion about death. But how do you fold that in?
Okay, well, in yoga, it is the disidentification of our beliefs and our stories. And I think that feels like death, right? That's what we're talking about when I left and who I think I am, letting go of all of that. And in sexuality, it is that dissolving of sexual energy into the heart, no mind, orgasm, the little death, the French call it. It's no mind, that kind of death. What I realized all along the way is the thing inside of me that has a really hard time with letting go. The part inside of me that resists change or is not open to life as it is unfolding. And I was very aware of it, that fear of letting go and how it kept just coming in my life in sexuality. Like I'm afraid to feel. That's been a pervasive theme throughout my life. Like I'm afraid to feel. So I'm just pushing, I'm controlling. I don't want to deal with the feeling of rejection or the feeling of abandonment or the feeling of fear. And so I just numb myself or don't let things in. And then I realized it felt like death to me. And so I started getting very curious about that and then started I thought, well, why don't I just turn to face that? Why don't I start looking at that? And I came across some teachings specifically from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I've had some great Tibetan Buddhist teachers, and their teachings of death and dying, and it just viscerally, I remember the first time I came across the teachings, I had a very strong landing. It felt like this is all landing and this is home, and somehow I've done this before. And I just followed those breadcrumbs. I followed that trail and just kept studying and kept practicing these death practices, and haven't stopped. You know, I'm still this morning I was in my practice of just reading about the bardos, and because ultimately it's like these the fear of change is the fear of death. So
Yeah, I
if
was
I
going to say,
turn,
for anybody that's listening, you might know, but one of the five kleshas that are like timeless and that really block us from this place of contentment and harmony and, like you said, just feeling, full feeling is this fear of change, and ultimately the biggest change is death. And so it is for anybody that's a control person that really like,
yes.
has hard, right? Like raise your hand. Anybody that has a hard time with transitions, raise your hand. Like this work is to have you become more adaptable, I think, with the being okay not knowing the outcome, and being okay with just allowing, so that you are not having, because ultimately we're fooling ourselves if we think we're actually controlling anything. you know
Yes.
we can be participants and we can be lively participants, but we're going to really exhaust ourselves if we're always trying to control.
Yes. And when I came across these teachings, it was like, oh my gosh, nobody's told me. Oh my gosh, nobody told me these things. And so I I I was like, okay, well, I guess then I can do that. I can start incorporating these in my teachings. That this life is a practice at every turn. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to practice just letting go of this identity. It's humans. It's a very innocent and natural part of our experience to be identified with this physical body, and that this is who I am. And yoga helps us see beyond just the physical body, and then practice with the very human, like make friends with ego, make friends with the mind, make friends instead of having that inner war with it. It's like we're holding each other's hands to end the war. And we have all this practice, and that this life is so generous and kind in the way that it just keeps giving us another opportunity to practice letting go, another opportunity to practice working and navigating the uncertainty of change, gives us another opportunity to practice the welcoming in of the things that seem unwelcomable. And
Beautiful.
if we can practice that now, then by the time death comes and it's time to let go of the physical body, well, we've been practicing, and we can let go with peace. We know how to do it. And what a better spiritual gift to give yourself, and what a better spiritual gift to give the people around you than a good death.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in the Buddhist tradition, what they say is you'll die how you are now. Like however your mind is now, that's what you take. The body goes, personality go. It's the mental patterns that you take with you. So what shape is your mind in right now? And nobody had told me that. It's like, holy shit, right. Like, I want to practice now. So if I have a neighbor that's just fucking banging on that construction and there's hammering and I'm sitting here in my meditation and I'm like just so pissed off and so irritated, it's just good to work with that. It's good to, okay, I see that, and have a laugh about it, a sense of humor about these things. And okay, that's what's happening. And so it gives me an opportunity to work on my impatience and my irritation. Because, this will come. It comes at death. As much as I say I want a peaceful death, and something's going to happen where
it makes me
comes.
think of like when you're saying construction, all that. I often reference the body as a home, which many people do. And like we have a lot we do, and I say control in a good way. We have ownership over how we build our house and take care of it. And the way I'm thinking like your practice is it's like all the rooms in the house are really cared for and lived in. There's no like living room that's just abandoned unless guests are coming, or the dining room table that's just cluttered until one time or two times a year. It's like you're going into all the rooms, the attic, the basement, the scary areas, and then you're really embodying them and living in them and inhabiting them in a way that they're being occupied,
Yes. Yes. What came to me this morning as I was practicing, it is this in the world and not of it. In the world and not of it. So it's not like just the of it part where you're just observing it as like an outsider, like just watching and I'm not a part of it. You are in the world. I mean, just like you're saying, inhabiting your body, inhabiting all of the rooms in the body, feeling it, digesting it, and it just moves through. And at the same time, knowing that it is not the totality of who you are. So it's like both in the world and not of it. So it's exactly that. Like this home.
Yeah, it is. I love that. Oh, well, I could talk to you all day. Susan, you're just a real gift and I can see you're such an energy healer because and I love it because you've done this work. You've had the path. And to me, I'm both very academic, but I'm much more experiential because I don't need a research paper to tell me what has worked. It's wonderful because you need to share it and people need to believe you. And then you have this like kind of codified document. But at the end of the day, if you've done the work, the experience of it, there's such a richer sharing, truly sharing, because you're coming to it from a place of like, I have been there and I'm still working on it. Nothing's going to get done until I'm making changes and I want to share those with you. So where can people learn more about you and join one of your wonderful, great EDS courses? YDS, not EDS.
Yeah, no, it's
yoga.
I know.
Yoga, sex, and death. Sorry. YSD.
Yes.
That's right, because I called it LSD at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought
a better mind trip for everybody.
Yes. Well, I want to say this piece though, what you're talking about, that's the inquiry piece. You've mentioned inquiry a couple of times. And that's like, yes, we can read it in a book, you can read it in a paper, science can say these things, but what is your direct experience of it? And that is when it's realized, means when it becomes real for you. And so that inquiry, I could talk a lot about inquiry, but I will get to the things. So you can find more about the retreats at samarasacenter.com, my website. It'll give you all the information of the upcoming retreat schedule and where you can find YSD basics. Everything is there. And also our Instagram has all of that. You can find a lot of juicy things there. And our IG handle is Samarasa Center. Samarasa is Samarasa.
Yeah,
So it's
we'll
a
put
kind of
that in
a
the show
mouthful.
notes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So those
Well,
are the two main places
I love it.
to
Everybody
find
check that
me.
out. Yes.
Yes,
It's like the perfect cocktail.
it
The
really is.
YSD cocktail. I love it. I think it's just it's from the macro to the micro, and it's from the individual to the collective. I feel like it's doing all of it. And I really appreciate that you're offering this so generously to everyone from your own experience, your own heart, and your own journeys. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to come and to share some space with you, to connect with you and all of your people. I
Yes,
appreciate it.
of course. And for everybody that's listening, as always, I'm pulling for you.
Yes, me too.